All right, good afternoon, good morning to you, wherever you're watching us from. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today, and happy International Women's Day. My name is Njoki Nguni. I am the Communications Associate here at African Leadership Center, and I am speaking to you from our King's College office here in London. So today we have planned for you what is promising to be a fascinating discussion from a lineup of incredible speakers who will be introduced to us a bit later by my colleague Maggie Lowila. But before I hand it over to her, please allow me to speak briefly about today's webinar, which will be to commemorate International Women's Day and also contribute to the conversation taking place at the 67th Commission on the Status of Women, CSW, around the theme of innovation and technological change and education in the digital age for achieving gender equality and the employment of all women and girls. So this event is also in line with the theme of King's Africa Week, which is changing Africa in shifting global landscape. And as a part of this conversation, we also tried to contribute to the ELC research agenda on society state, dynamic and impact on peace and statehood, and which explores a couple of questions. And in this case, we'll look at how evolution in technology and new media are altering societal responses to security and development challenges, and also how these dynamics and evolution influence our notion of our statehood in Africa. So a few housekeeping announcements. So please use the chat box to engage in the conversation, and the Q&A box for any questions. And then if you want to directly ask a question, you can use the raise hand feature and you'll be given an opportunity to speak. So without further ado, allow me to invite my colleague Maggie to take over the discussion. Welcome, Maggie.
Thank you, Njoki, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Hello and happy International Women's Day. My name is Maggie Lowila, as has already been mentioned, and I'm the Program Associate at the African Leadership Center. I will be the moderator for this panel today. So the idea behind this panel was really to add voice to ongoing discussions around technological advancements and some of the gendered implications of that. So we thought that we would put this panel together to bring people who are working in the digital media and digital technology space to have conversations around how technology has in some ways been a great blessing, but also has had its issues here and there. So today we invited three lovely ladies who work in the digital technology space in various capacities. I'll just give a brief bio of each and every single one of them. Our first panelist, we have Fungai Machirori, who is a Zimbabwean digital practitioner and commentator who straddles the world between theory and practice. Her main area of research is digital sociology with a focus on identity, agency, and power within African digitality. The second panelist we have is Nyadak, who is a peace and conflict practitioner and communication specialist focused on peace building, policy, and digital communications. She's been active in the civil space with a focus on national policy making, youth peace and security, human rights, gender, technology, and mediation. And finally, we have Tindyebwa, who is a writer and human rights defender from Zimbabwe. She is a peace and security fellow at the African Leadership Center at the moment. And she's passionate about human rights, post-conflict justice, and storytelling. So I'd like to welcome all of our panelists. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for accepting to be part of this panel. And I guess to just kick off this conversation and to contextualize what we're trying to talk about today, I'd like us to reflect and give our experiences based on, your personal life, your professional experience. What has digital media and technology meant for you? And what are some of the gendered implications that you have run into and the key issues that emerge in terms of gender inequality? At this point, I would like to invite Fungai to speak first, please. Sorry, you're on mute.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak and obviously to share experiences on this important day. I will just go through very briefly my history within the digital space. I started out years ago when blogging was still a very popular way of people expressing themselves. I was very active, very curious about the digital space at that time. That's obviously before social media becomes very popular. This was a way of people sharing things about themselves and their lives in the way that we now use more of social media to do. And then eventually I evolved into a space where I thought my voice as it's on its own wasn't enough, or I wanted to try to augment voices, multiple voices of people, because in the digital space at the time when we were blogging, there was a few people who were quite prominent or consistent with their blogs. One of them being Delta Milayondo. I think she started blogging. We started blogging within a week of each other. And, you start seeing all these people. And I started thinking, oh, what would a community look like if we all kind of had a platform and a space to speak with or through collectively? And that's where the project Her Zimbabwe came from. This was a platform that was bringing together and leveraging women's voices digitally, encouraging storytelling, and having more people speak. I think when one looks at the gender dynamics of this, it was quite an interesting project. It has since ceased to exist, but it ran for about 5 years. And I think one of the things that was quite interesting to note was the different levels of comfort different women had in speaking about different issues. So obviously there are issues that women tend to be associated with speaking about. So, if it's to do with gender, women's rights, feminism, and things like that, it's somehow socialized into us that obviously as women, that's the areas that we talk to and about. And also in our training, or in our work professions, we tend to go into workspaces that are more gender related or that are speaking to more social roles and ideas about what women do and know. But then once you sort of move out of that and you try to get information or content around politics, around technology, around finance, markets, and that sort of thing, it becomes more and more difficult. And I think that was one of the challenges that we experienced as Her Zimbabwe, where we didn't want to necessarily only speak to the things that people expected women to be able to be experts on, but to leverage different conversations about the state of the nation and other things that we felt women could speak to. However, you then start to see that there is a lot of fear that is associated with that for a lot of women. They're like, oh, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to speak about something that can get me into trouble, or I'm not too sure if I know enough about that. Whereas I don't think that's a real thought process that most men would go through. And I'm not being sexist or biased in any way, but I do think that men tend to have more of a confidence to speak about things with an authority they may not have about it, but, they go for it. And I think women, it's, our socialization and the environments that we're in, where if you speak about certain things, you become, you stick out quite a lot. You become a target. People try to find a way to bring you down because how dare you? Why are you speaking about politics? And I think Tindyebwa can speak very well to that, because I've seen some of the struggles she has on Twitter, constantly having all kinds of things said about you and, having to come out and defend yourself in ways that men never have to. And so I understand that, and I do appreciate why that happens, that women tend to shy away from things that put them in an isolated role or space where they stand out, because it's safer to just blend into the background or to be among other people speaking about the same things. And so I think that's really what I've noticed. And I'll just finally say very briefly, I run a podcast. And my podcast, again, is talking about digital trends and issues. And I tried to speak about different things. And one of the topics I recently spoke on was about ChatGPT. And I'd been following the information about it once it came out, trying to figure out what it does, how it works, etc. And then I did this podcast. And I got approached by an organization that was looking for women who speak about ChatGPT so that they could, interface with the media and offer their opinions and points of views. Now, when I got that, I didn't really think about it at the time, but then with time, I thought, wow, is it so rare that women are speaking about ChatGPT? And is it that women don't understand or don't have the capacity to speak about ChatGPT, or is it that it is just not such a common thing that if you happen to speak about it, someone wants you to then, speak about it for the media or something, because not many women are doing that. And so I'll just say that I think that it's not that women don't know these things. It's probably an issue of access to spaces to speak about them, but it's also social factors around what women are socialized to say we can speak about and what is not our place. And also just generally the toxicity of social media and trolls and people who come in and attack women. So other women see that happening to other women and say, you know what, I don't want that in my life. I'd rather just stick to my little space or what I know and not stick my head out into things that could get me into that kind of trouble.
Wow, thanks for starting us off. There's so many great things that you've said, especially on women. It's not that women don't know these things. It's, there are other factors that influence, when they speak, where they speak, how they speak. And just because you mentioned Tindyebwa, I wonder if Tindyebwa, you'd like to go next and speak about your experience in this space.
Thank you so much. So yes, I do agree with everything that Fungai has explained, and a lot of the things you said actually have been my experience. So I'm a human rights defender and a writer, and fortunately for me, my career started when already the digital space was already there. So I started off as someone who was just sharing my opinions on Facebook. And so people would see those opinions and engage with them, and when I was doing that, I wasn't out there being an activist or a human rights defender. I was just saying what I think, right? But what I noticed was that traditionally, women haven't really had the space where you can just go and say what you think, because we have always depended on the benevolence of gatekeepers. And most of these times, these gatekeepers are men, right? So what the digital space has done for me and other women is to give us the space where you don't have to ask anyone, can I come on your show? Could you please publish my work? You just go there and you say what is on your mind. And I think that has really increased the number of women's voices on different issues, and it needn't be political issues or academic issues, just any issues. Really, you'll find that the voice of women, even in women's issues, traditionally was so small, and we never had that space where we could actually be heard and be the ones to say exactly what we're going through, right? So that is what the digital space has done for me. So, and as a storyteller, because what is at the heart of my activism, I think, is the skills I've been leveraging on, the skills as a storyteller and a writer. So I am able now to go out there into the communities and talk to other women, right? Because you find that even as the experiences that I have as someone who goes into the communities is that when you get there, the people that speak on behalf of communities are usually men, right? So now that I'm a woman activist who understands that women's voices are rarely heard or prioritized, when I go out there into the communities, I make it a point that I also hear women's voices, and I come and I bring their stories to social media so that more and more people will hear the perspective of women about politics, the perspective of women about historical human rights violations. The way I chose to do my activism is to document human rights violations. So be it historical human rights violations or contemporary ones, and then advocate for justice for those. So as I do that, I am cognizant of the fact that women's voices are really heard, and I do my best to bring women's voices to social media. So it's all about sharing my opinions, documenting the human rights atrocities and that are going on around me and that have happened in the past. And digital media, with all its flaws that Fungai was explaining, has been that space where I have my say, regardless of who wants to hear it or who doesn't. So I would like to encourage more women, to realize that social media is a space where you can share your views about anything, cooking, politics, whatever it is. This is the space that we have now where nobody can shut you from it. I think I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Tandekile. I think what's wonderful is, you emphasizing that social media and digital media in general is a space where you've been able to use your voice and project it, but also to kind of bring the voices of other women, which also is connected to the point that Fungai was saying about community and collective voice. I would now like to invite Nyadak to give us your own experience, perhaps in the context of South Sudan. Let us know how digital media has been useful for you in your personal life, but also in your professional work.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Nyadak. As I'm listening, actually, I'm just feeling like this African experience we can all share, and it's things that we have all been a part of. I think especially for me, being that I'm in the peace and conflict space. I'm in the, started in the traditional space. And when you see South Sudan, we're still in a transitional period, right? So there's a lot of peace efforts happening, a lot of youth peace and security happening, a lot of young people who are just coming out now to be able to, engage in processes and kind of push forward what we see as the South Sudan that we want. And being that it's a new country, it's also like putting ourselves in a position where we're able to put our voices and we're able to find our space. So just to circle back a little bit, I think for me, entering into the digital media space was honestly by mistake, but also very intentional, because as I graduated and then came into the country, finding my space when it comes to peace and conflict and active processes in the country, it's very tiny. And it's very difficult for someone to be able to insert themselves, because at the end of the day, your degree does not matter. It matters what you can do, but also who is in the space already. As mentioned before, a lot of the people in the space are men. A lot of them are older men. So now we have to find ways in which we can actively contribute and find ourselves in the front line together with everybody else, but still not put ourselves in a space where we are tight, where if something is to happen, we don't know how to remove ourselves. And it's very interesting because with South Sudan, the biggest percentage is young people. I think we're at 72, 75 almost. And so there's no way the young people can be left out. And so being that we're in the era of digital media, we said, okay, how can we find a way to be able to contribute, to be able to participate if we're not going to be left into the traditional space? So personally, for me, again, I couldn't really find my way in the traditional aspect of how things worked. And as a person who loves research, I'm curious, I also love to write. I found that digital media was one of the best avenues for me to be able to positively contribute, but also share information and share my thoughts with the world. And so now we ended up with spaces like Facebook and Twitter, which is interesting. And I think I'll also add on to that later, being that we're still very low in terms of infrastructure when it comes to technology in South Sudan, but yet there are so many South Sudanese on Facebook and on Twitter. And so with Twitter, we came to find that not only is there a lot of people, but there's also young people who are actively contributing from all the different spaces there are in the world, those who are in the diaspora, those who are in the country, and they're positively following what's happening in politics, what's happening in culture. People are able to learn about cultures of South Sudan and what is going on in South Sudan. So we thought to ourselves, then why don't we make this a community where not only young people, but also just South Sudanese in general can come together and contribute. And that's how we ended up with South Sudanese on Twitter, which now has actually grown to a very big community and has been very helpful in the work that we do. So being able to enter into digital media has allowed me to document, which is something that I really love, but also something that is needed at a crucial time like this, as we go through the peace agreement and hopefully transition into elections and into just a full facilitating state. It is important that we document such times so that we're able to look back and reflect and also allow that to support the development efforts that are happening. So that has been very useful, but also we're able to come together and bring people and help them learn about technology and digital media. There are so many people, the literacy level is so low. There's so many people who haven't had the chance to go to formal education. So learning things like digital media, which is something that you can learn quickly, being able to access information, which you can be able to do from your smartphone, from your laptop, has been very crucial and helpful into speeding up our society into where we are in the world today. Of course, technology is really fast. We cannot keep up, but then we try as much as we can to be able to make sure that everybody's integrated and that we're doing this as a society coming together.
Thanks for that, Nyadak. Again, what I'm hearing is a lot of using your own voice. You found this space where in other traditional spaces, you weren't able to easily access or easily contribute to. And now digital media has provided this platform and this opportunity for you to be able to add your voice to conversations about peace, about reconciliation, about what your ideas are supposed to be for South Sudan, and also sharing that space with others and bringing others in to also have that conversation and be in community with you. And I think that's very inspiring, and that's very wonderful. So I'd like to veer off a bit, like from all the things that we've said about how wonderful technology has been, or how it's been useful in your lives personally, but also in your professional lives. I wonder if we could reflect a bit on what are some of the challenges that have come up. I know that Fungai spoke about this a bit. I don't know if there's anything more that you would like to speak on and highlight in terms of what are some of the challenges that I think African women and girls especially are facing, trying to be in this space and engage or leverage the space to its fullest capacity, if you may.
Yeah, that was really fascinating. Thank you to all the other panelists for your inputs. I'm learning quite a lot as we go. I think as I've spoken to, there's, these challenges of the environment and also the socialization that we have. So I guess it's an internal and external tension at the same time. You may want to speak up, but then, you're in a cultural setting that says you're not supposed to. And, speaking up is not just about you. If you become a target, that means all the people around you, your family members, your community potentially also become targets. Or if you start speaking about things, about your own experience that involve other people, then, there's all those challenges, especially because of our cultures, which are very closed. We are not supposed to talk about, the things that happen in our homes, in our families. We're not supposed to take them out there. And here you are on a public platform speaking about yourself in context to other people, or else you're speaking about something that's controversial enough that if people feel they can't target you, or if they feel that it's not just enough to target you, they may actually target your family members or friends or other close people in your life who they feel like if they target them, then you will stop talking. So I think there's always that tension that's happening within the context of, just how African societies and cultures work. We're very communal. You never stand on your own. You're a representative of many people's lives and reputations. So I think that's one thing. And then obviously we've talked a little bit about the patriarchal environment where as women, there is an expectation of what we should be able to speak about and where and how. But then there's the internal conflict as well that's happening because we're all products of whatever culture or society that we're brought up in. So you may feel the desire to do something, but then the tension of all these other things that are happening makes you then say, it's not worth it. It's actually not worth it for me to say something. So I'll just, keep quiet, or I'll wait for someone else to say it, and then I'll add my voice, or I'll retweet it, or I'll share it. And I think that's really ultimately where a lot of the challenges happen. Like I said already, it's not that women don't know or have opinions about a lot of things. It's just that sharing them is not deemed appropriate either personally or contextually, culturally, communally. I think the other challenges that then just start to happen are around different technologies. So you do find that, according to which platform you would use, there's a different kind of level of trolling or hate or misogyny that one is exposed to. So if you're on Facebook, and that's just because Facebook is a very different platform, it's likely you have friends on your Facebook page or on your account. So those are people you might know personally or are friends of a friend, or you have some sort of connection with them. So it's a safer environment. If you say something out there, even if someone doesn't agree with it, they're not likely to attack you in a very, rude, all, gloves off kind of way and just like really be very hateful towards you. But then you find that the more public the space becomes, the less of that there is. So if you're on Twitter, and I think Twitter is probably the space where if you put yourself out there and you have something controversial or something topical to speak about and you're a woman, the trolls and the hate speech are likely to descend on you with a lot more power and more intention. And that's, I think, particularly because Twitter as a space is a news-oriented space. So we're not sharing necessarily so much about our personal lives, what I'm doing, or my babies, or, this is the family holiday we went on, which is more something you would do on Facebook or Instagram. You're more like, to be relevant on Twitter, you have to have an opinion. You have to have something you're saying, or you have to be keeping up with something that's going on. Otherwise, yes, you might have a little bit of a constituency that's interested in your personal life, but mostly what's fueling Twitter is news, information, facts, and politics. And so once you're already in a space that is oriented that way, and then you put yourself out there in a certain way, obviously the pushback is going to be very different. These are people mostly who have anonymous accounts and a lot of time on their hands, because I'll never understand the time that trolls have to actually, just go for people, but, they have time on their hands, so they're probably not doing much at that time. They're frustrated with whatever's going on. So I think particularly within a Zimbabwean context, there's a lot of frustration, and justifiably so. There's a lot that is not going right in the Zimbabwean context. And a lot of people are frustrated. And I think a lot of people then just kind of go on social media to relieve themselves of that frustration for a little bit. And so if they find, here's this eloquent woman who has an opinion about something and, I don't agree with it, all of a sudden they'll show up and they will not engage with your argument. They will engage with your femininity, your gender, something. They're not going to engage with you as a person with a rational argument or a contribution. It just descends very quickly into name calling and something about your mother or your father or something. It's just not on the same level of engagement that you're looking for. And so I think it's those things that are also these really important dynamics about which platforms women feel comfortable in. I think Pinterest is one of those spaces that women feel particularly comfortable with because, you've got your pins, you've got your boards, and it orients us more into, a domestic role. And I have no problems with domestic roles. I'm on Pinterest. I pin a lot of things there as well. It's fascinating, it's visual, it's fun. But, it's those spaces where one will find themselves feeling safer to go. On Instagram, if posting whatever's going on in your life here, I don't know, you're on a boat drinking wine or something, I don't know. But those spaces become safer spaces for women because they're reinforcing what society thinks women only engage with. So you've got your boards for cooking and jewelry and home and deco and design. And then, you've got your Instagram and you're talking about, the holiday you took with the family or something like that. But then once you get onto Twitter and just try to say, among all those different things, I also have an opinion about what's going on in, the country or in the world. And then it's like, no way, you're not allowed on this platform, in this space. Go back to the spaces where you are valid or relevant. And so I think it's this, the technology is not the technology by itself. Technology is shaped by people. It's shaped by its users. And the users, if they are largely men, they create a space that's safe for other men. And I'm not saying that trolls do not target men as well. Trolls target everybody if they feel like it, but men, they might take a step back and say, hey, you know what, he maybe has a point, let me take a step back, or they'll frame it in a different way. So I think it's also the design of the technology and how we socialize technology. We all use it differently. We don't have the same Twitter that's in America, that's in South Sudan, that's in Zimbabwe, that's in every country. Everyone appropriates that technology and uses it within a cultural context or their understanding of it. And so I think that's what happens is people socialize these spaces and they make it very unsafe for certain people to be on certain platforms and they stay away. And if they come in, there's huge consequences for speaking, and other women are seeing this. So it's not like you're not there, you're seeing it and you're like, do I actually want to put myself in a position where someone could come and talk to me the same way that they're talking to this person? And the answer is likely to be no. So you will just merge with the background and just watch and keep quiet.
Gosh, so many amazing things that you've said there. But I think what's really stuck with me is that, the design of the technology matters and that technology is socialized, because now we see that some of the inequalities that we see in, our real lives, our social lives, are now replicated within the online space as well. And I thought that was such an interesting point. Tindyebwa, would you like to also share how, in your own experience, you've seen technology kind of be harmful or, yeah, kind of propel these inequalities that women face in their day-to-day lives?
Thanks, Maggie. So absolutely, I have seen that and I've experienced it. So at the core of all the challenges that I've faced is the idea of silencing, right? So in as much as I explained earlier that what I do is I try and bring attention to issues of marginalization, issues of human rights violations, or try and mobilize for protests for particular things, it means that the work that I'm doing, there are people already feeling threatened by what I'm doing. So these are the perpetrators of the violations that I document and perpetrators in the justice issues that I'm advocating for. But the unfortunate thing for women is that this silencing is gendered, and the approach, the methods that I used to try and silence women in my space are gendered in that, for example, how the perpetrators of the violations will try and silence you is by what we call slut shaming, right? Where they can fabricate something that they know will speak to misogynists who are supposed to be on your side, right? So the sad thing about misogyny is that even in our spaces as human rights defenders, some of the male human rights defenders who are supposed to be our allies are also misogynistic. So if you are slut shamed, you find that those people who traditionally you'll be fighting with to say, maybe let's say we're advocating for clean water, for example, right? We are in those spaces, we all believe that there must be clean water, but the moment someone then says, no, Tandegile is, if they slut shame you, whichever way, some of those people, because they subscribe to the misogynistic agenda, then also become perpetrators of violence against you. So that is the unfortunate way in which attacks against women activists are gendered, in that misogyny seems to unite men in different spaces, right? So this unity against you as a woman usually is stronger than any issue that you might be fighting. So I think the fact that your voice is threatening not only the perpetrators of the issues you're advocating against, but misogyny in general, because there are also men in our space, gatekeepers, who feel, who do you think you are in the first place saying this? So at the face of such attacks, they'll also be silent because they subscribe to the notion of silencing you. So I think that has been the greatest challenge that I faced, this silencing, which is done not only by perpetrators of human rights violations, but also by male activists and male politicians and male human rights defenders. So, but I think despite that, social media again and the digital space itself has created a space where women can also show their solidarity when other women are being attacked, right? So the fact that this is done publicly means that as a woman, you'd get more support than before when all these attacks were done in private, right? You'd face all these things and be unable to even prove that you have been harassed as a woman, because some of these attacks are subtle. But when it's done publicly, yes, the damage is also bigger because some of the people believe those fabrications against you. But also, I've always found comfort in the fact that women actually even women who are usually silent because they feel that I don't want to be in the heart of things. I don't want any attention on myself. Women do rally behind other women when they're being attacked on social media. And I've always found comfort in that. And that's what keeps me going, basically, that even when people, and that in itself, the attacks against women activists on social media are in another way, a way of bringing attention to the fact that there is violence against women. And so these people attack us, but I see it as proof that these are the things that we're talking about. And as they happen publicly, I think it raises awareness even in other people who traditionally have never understood the gendered nature of violence. So this is what I've experienced, but I think social media also makes it easier. The fact that it is happening in public means that people, people are not as stupid as most misogynists think that if they just throw something, everyone will lap it up. There are people who will believe it, but there are people who will also realize, oh, okay, there's a problem with this, and then unlearn some of these things that have been prevalent. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that's a great point to end on, that when this, even though it is a horrible thing that women are still being attacked online and they're facing different forms of violence online as well, that it's happening on a platform that it can be seen more visibly and therefore brings attention to the issue. I think that was a really good point to end on. Nyadak, I invite you to answer the same question and share your own thoughts.
Yes. Ooh. Okay. So I wanted to just build up on 3 points, but I wanted to start with the cultural aspect since we have spoken about it a bit in the past few minutes. And I think with cultural, I want to go 2 ways. One is that our society is so cultural and so stuck to our ways and traditions of life that for many people, one of the challenges we face is the aspect that a lot of people don't wait to understand concepts. So we oftentimes find ourselves in a situation where you're bringing up a topic. It could be advocacy, it could be information. And because that person does not understand the topic, or they heard something that to them is triggering to their space, then now there's automatic pushback to the issue, even though it might be something that is beneficial to them or might be helpful to them. So one big thing that we do often face the times that people do not understand concepts and do not wait for accurate information. Sometimes, especially like when we see with trends, it's easier for them to jump on the trend before actually taking time to listen or to research for themselves to understand what these concepts are about. And I think a really big example is feminism. In South Sudan, feminism is almost like it's almost like you mentioned feminism and things go up in flames with a lot of people still not understanding what it means and also understanding the other ways it means to other people. So just take some time to understand what it is and then you can engage. In terms of culture as well, which is actually quite unfortunate, and a lot of my colleagues and comrades in the country have experienced, is due to this also really deep need to stand on cultural grounds. You often find that there are women who do not support other women just because they'd like to go off of the backing of culture. So if they see something, especially if it's gone online and there are a lot of men who are against it, or it is something that is very outspoken, we often find a lot of women going online and attacking the person who said what they needed to say because they don't agree, or because they got backlash from the male gender. It could be their brothers, their cousins, politicians, and then now they go and attack this lady who is maybe actually bringing a very important issue to light. So then that has deterred a lot of women from speaking out, and then which also creates a very toxic space, because in young people, especially young women, they now fear to come. Because if we see that also a lot of our older sisters, a lot of our mothers are not able to also get that point across sometimes is that fear of how is it going to be seen if I said it, right? If they couldn't put it across, how am I going to say it any different that is going to make a difference to the topic that is being discussed ahead of time? So culture has been a very double-edged sword, particularly for us in South Sudan. And I think a lot of women have often needed a safe space and solidarity from other women online, but unfortunately they've not been able to receive that, which has been very exhausting for them. I also want to talk about the aspect of infrastructure. South Sudan as a new country, just gained independence in 2011. There's a lot of infrastructure gaps that we have. A lot of the things are just being started from scratch, but then there are also others that are being modified to fit the current context, or maybe those that were operating previous to the Sudan context that we had before. So there's a lot of gaps that still need to be filled, and we still need a lot of professionals to come and fit them, because there's still a lot of young people and a lot of professionals who have not yet returned to the country when it comes to the expertise in terms of where we need to be in the technological space. So infrastructure has been a really big thing. We still suffer a lot when it comes to communication, access to internet, access to mobiles, access to communications from the capital city to rural areas. That is still a really big thing, but operators are working. The National Communication Authority is working, and we are hoping that in the near future, our communication penetration will be higher, internet penetration will be higher, and we'll have more people who are able to have access to the internet and other digital media, as well as affordability, that they're able to afford these things so that it becomes a norm, because there are a lot of people who have never had access to internet, so they do miss out on a lot of things. In terms of infrastructure, we also have that aspect of, there are a lot of girls and women bringing back the cultural aspect who, again, fear to be able to speak out. But then there are also those who, and I think a lot of times we sideline them, those who have the expertise. Women in STEM. STEM is just coming up in South Sudan, like really forcing and really celebrating women in technology, in science, in engineering. We don't really have a lot of young women and girls in that sector, but of course we are seeing a lot of them coming in now. So we're trying to encourage and support the girls and women right now who are in these fields to be able to venture out, finish their degree, do extra learning in spaces where they're able to actually contribute, and that they're given the freedom as their male counterparts to be able to practice in these fields. And last one I wanted to talk about in terms of policy. We still have, the policy context in South Sudan is very challenging. And a lot of times you find that one, either the policy is not there, or two, it's there and it's not being implemented. So you often find a lot of challenges to find that we have great English, great well-written policies that are available in the country, but nobody's implementing them. Nobody's looking at them until something happens and we go, oh, there's an act or there's a policy or a bill that is available that we can utilize to be able to regulate some of these spaces. I have to commend that there's a Computer Misuse Act. It's an act. It's an order which actually has been ratified into law by the president. So I think that is the initial policy document when it comes to technology alone, without other issues included into it. So we are hoping to also use that to help regulate digital, not just digital media, but media in general. And we are hoping that there are more to come in the near future. And then another thing is the aspect of the lack of professionals in tech, and specifically tech law. So we only have about, I think, 1 or 2 people. I can honestly say I know one person who's a lawyer, who is a man. His name is Wani Steven. He concentrates on tech law, and he's probably the only person at the moment who is in tech law. So we do need more professionals in tech law, but also women who are in those spaces so that they can be able to incorporate the gender aspect into not just technology activism, but also policy making.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I think your last point about having more professionals in tech and, bringing in the aspect of tech law kind of takes me back to Fungai's first point about, women engaging in this space, but more like with technical expertise than it is just in spaces that, involve women, and spaces that we're sort of safe in, or rather people aren't threatened by. So I think that was a really good point. And perhaps this takes me now to thinking through culture, which you mentioned. How do we go about, when thinking about, culture within digital technology spaces, while acknowledging that, the tech space is very much influenced by the real life space and our social rules that we live by, and our cultural rules that we live by? How can we go about kind of creating spaces that is safer for women? How do we engage men in these conversations to ensure that everyone is involved and engaged and plays a part, and can create a space that kind of works for all of us, a space that we're all safe in, a space that we can really utilize to speak with authority on the things that we have expertise on? If you have any ideas around that, please, I welcome them. I don't know if you want to go as we had before. Fungai, you can start us off.
I mean, that question, if we could find the solution to that question, I think then we wouldn't need to be having these conversations. We'd be like, okay, found the answer, now it's fine. Like, we don't need this anymore. But I think, just going back to the point about women in STEM, I think it's a very interesting space, because it's important, and it's, so crucial to have these spaces that leverage women in environments that we don't think women would be found, right? So to have these kinds of safe spaces where women can feel like, okay, I'm not rocking the boat too much. I'm here and I'm among other women, and it feels safer. But I think at the same time as that is a very important space, it's this double-edged sword, because I think a lot of women who enter spaces that women are not envisioned to be in, then just become, and not to say just as though that is not enough, but they become women in STEM, or they become women in something. And there's never really that association of these women as just being people in STEM, or, you're an engineer. There's always this qualifying, this is a female engineer, this is a female artist, this is a female something, and you're never just the artist. And so I think that there is this challenge as well still that exists, where women do, go through the glass ceiling, but the identity of them as simply being, whatever it is still somehow qualified by their gender. And some people are comfortable with that. Some people would want to be, identified as a female something, because I think as well, sometimes people do want that. They're like, oh, this is a female doctor, or this is a female something, because other women also like to get service from women. Many women like to get service from other women. If they know that you're a female something, they're like, oh, here's a woman I can go and actually get some, advice or information from. But I think, again, it's this double-edged sword as to when does one actually just become an expert in their field versus consistently being referred to as a female expert in their field, which then again orients people to say, oh, you're a female expert in this field, so can you talk to us about gender in STEM? Can you talk to us about gender in technology? Versus, can you just talk about technology? Can you just talk about STEM? And so I think, there's a sweet spot where those spaces that are safe need to also, and I don't want to use this word because I know once you say radical, people see people burning things down and, doing some kind of stuff that, you know, people think, oh my gosh, this is just like crazy. But I think there is a level of radicalism that we need to also infuse into those spaces and say, hey, you know what, if this is a safe enough space and this is, you know, how you feel comfortable identifying, good, great. But if there is, you know, something else you aspire towards, or some other way that you want to frame your expertise, which is gender neutral. And again, I don't know if you know, that's sounds like someone is taking away their identity as a woman, which to me, it doesn't. It's just saying I'm an expert. You know, I can speak about gender, I can speak about the general situation, but then I am a woman in STEM and I'm a person in STEM, you know? So I think that somehow there is still this thing that we struggle with, you know, to how to make those spaces nurture people beyond what their identifiers are, and to say, I'm just an expert. So there's still a lot of work, obviously, to be done in getting to those spaces. But I think, and, you know, it can be very simple to say, well, just go out there and claim the space. It's not that simple. As we've talked about, there's a lot of things that impede women from taking those positions or those roles, different identities that women occupy that kind of come into conflict with some of those other identities that, you know, people may want them to take on. But I think the containers or the spaces that are safe for women to start out from also have a responsibility to challenge or to nurture women into spaces where they feel comfortable as experts in their own right, and not to be qualified by being women, because, you know, no one qualifies men by being men for being in STEM. You know, you're not going to ask a man who's in STEM the first question, so what's it like being a man in STEM? That's not to say that's not a valid question to ask a woman, because that's a very, you know, social, there are very social issues that a woman in STEM experiences and has to speak to or can speak to. But the whole conversation cannot be that. You know, the next question can't be, so, you know, how did you get into STEM as a woman? How did, you know, just let her speak about STEM. You know, that's her expertise, that's her training, and she's just as qualified as a man to speak about those same issues.
Thank you so much for that. So much for us to digest and think about. I do agree with you that perhaps a radical approach might be needed, but we won't go too much into that. Tindyebwa, please share your thoughts with us.
Okay, so my opinion is that culture is always evolving, right? And just by virtue of us now having the space where as women, we can no longer be ignored, I think that alone has changed this culture that women must just be seen and not heard, right? So I believe that we are already chipping away at that idea that as women, we shouldn't be heard, we can't have opinions on things. I mean, it's still perpetuated on social media, where as a woman, unless you're sharing pictures of yourself, or doing things that show that women should be seen, many people will upload that, right? But we are also now being heard. So I feel that the culture is shifting, and I think what causes evolution in culture is education and awareness raising, right? And social media offers us the space to educate people about issues. I mean, when I first went on social media, I was really ignorant about a lot of things with regards to feminism, for example, right? But as I engaged with veteran feminists, if I can say that, you know, I understood more. My education and knowledge about women's rights, about the need for equality, I think it increased. And I've encountered a lot of people who will say, I'm not a feminist, I'm not a feminist because of what feminism has been propagandized to be by misogynists, right? But when you then engage them and ask them, also, you don't believe in the equality of women? They're like, yes, I do. So as those conversations happen, awareness is increased and people actually realize, oh, okay, so I am a feminist. Men and women become more aware of these issues that we're talking about. So I really believe that digital media is a tool where we can shift the culture and safer spaces will be created. So the creation of safe spaces will come from the education that we can share on social media. It will come from the awareness that is shown on social media, even as people are attacking you, as I explained earlier. And, I believe that social media has also demystified this notion. As young women, we are always told that older women will never support you, older women don't want you in the space. But what social media has shown me personally is that that is not true at all. Women have your back. Every time I'm attacked, it's the older women that will come to my DM and say, don't worry, we've been through this before, we've got your back. It's women my age who will come to me and say, are you okay? I'm sorry that happened to you. So I actually believe that all this misogynistic propaganda that has prevailed for so long, that has even prevented us women from coming together, is changing. We are now understanding that, oh, okay, we actually do believe in each other. We actually can support each other. So I think it's not a matter of us expecting change overnight, but I think we should see the change that is already happening and be encouraged that the culture, things will shift. They're already shifting, and women eventually will no longer have to fight these battles of such obvious things, that seemingly obvious things, as the fact that men and women are equal. It's not even a question we should be debating, but because things are the way they are, we will keep educating each other, raising awareness, and digital media gives us that platform.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being open and sharing your own personal experience of, being supported by other women and women coming to you when you were being attacked. I think that's an important side that needs to be, also highlighted. Nyadak, I'd like to invite you to share your thoughts as well.
Yeah, definitely love to agree with my fellow panelists here. They really said amazing things that also resonate with me, and I'm sure a lot of young women in the country. In terms of the discussions, I believe the discussions are already happening. In the past 3-4 years, there are a lot of things that often come up. A lot of times men and women are in the same spaces. I've seen a lot of loving spaces, safe spaces for women of different ages and different generations. And I think one of the good things that we have done as people in the peace building space is often push that intergenerational kind of connection, which oftentimes we have found a greater solidarity within. And even with things like the peace process and some of these very difficult times for the people in the country, those spaces have usually been very helpful, especially for young women who are also trying to understand and navigate this kind of spaces. A lot of the times we realize that because there's a lot of politics and there's a tendency for politics to overshadow a lot of things that happen in South Sudan. Sometimes we think some things are not happening, but they're actually happening. People are talking, spaces are happening, and then spaces like Twitter spaces, for example, when we come to digital media, has been very helpful. People holding spaces to inform others on what is going on. This is what is happening, mobilizing, organizing. That has been very helpful for a lot of people in different spaces. And sometimes that has been their only refuge when it comes to active mobilizing in spaces where they may not feel like the traditional space is safe. So that has been very helpful for them. Another thing that I wanted to really emphasize on was also, I know, yes, radical does sound big, but I think the best way for me to explain this is a lot of times, especially as young women, we have realized that you actually do have to push yourself into the space or else nothing will happen. And we realize that a lot of people, especially our men and uncles and fathers in politics, for them, sometimes it's actually very more useful if you don't talk about it, if you are sidelined in the corner, if you don't understand it, because that means that you're not going to move. You're not going to do any action that is going to counteract what they already think or feel is right for the country, and that is canceling your voice, which is very wrong. So oftentimes we have found that it's okay, even if it's one person who just pushes in and says, let me do this. It's okay if you don't understand it now. If you understand it later and you're on board, then you're more than welcome to join. And we have found that to be very helpful, and especially in the political space, to increase the efficiency of women's participation in political processes, in cultural processes and social processes. We have found that to be very helpful, because that is the only way that we have been able to make sure that they're participating, and not just for the sake of numbers and for the sake of people to say, oh, there's women here. Yeah, and then also in the aspect of, again, pushing down and telling anyone who wants to say that I'm going to bring you into the conversation because you're a woman. I'm going to bring you into this because you're a young girl. We have decided, as the young women of South Sudan, we're not going to tolerate that anymore, right? You're not just going to call me because, oh, we realize there's 3 men, so let's just bring you so that you can be a nice little, women addition to this, whatever is going on here. Manels are no longer allowed. It's going to be a panel, and we're going to have men and we're going to have women. So we have found that also us putting our foot down has been very useful in terms of not just mobilization or information sharing, but also our participation across all levels. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's really important, like you said, that you highlighted the stories of South Sudan, or the narrative of South Sudan is, kind of just conflict and all of the political things that are going on, but there's this other side that you're talking about Twitter spaces, about the young women of South Sudan saying, you will not just tokenize us. That's not what's going to happen. If you want us to be here, then you must include our voices, and we must participate and participate meaningfully. So thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for putting that out on this platform. So at this point, I'd like to open the floor for questions for all our participants who've joined us today and who are following the conversation. If you have any questions for the panelists, kindly just raise your hand and introduce yourself and ask your questions. Thank you, Munya. I see your hand is up. Please go ahead, unmute yourself. Sorry about that. He'll be unmuted in a second. Well, we try and figure that out. Sorry, we're having some technical issues. While we try and work on that, perhaps we can we can talk about what are some of, the key lessons that you've learned in your journey that you would pass on. I know most of us, we're all young women at this point, so we're not thinking about, but we're thinking about girls, for the next generation of girls. Is there anything that they can be doing now so that when they're young women and they're pursuing some of the things that they... Oh, okay. So there's, yeah. Okay, so the question from Munya is, I wanted to know from Fungai if she considers the closing of her Zimbabwe as a loss to the voices of feminists.
Thank you, Munya, for your question. Indeed, I think there was a momentum that Her Zimbabwe managed to sustain or create that, unfortunately, because it no longer exists. I think a lot of people had lots to say and could have contributed a lot to that conversation. But I do know that there is now an organization called Feminist Voices, and it's run by a young woman who's very, very vibrant and, is bringing up a lot of conversation points that are equally relevant and important for the culture to speak about. But obviously, it's more helpful to have more voices than one, more platform than one, because the number of platforms and the number of voices is larger if there's more people. I will say, and I think it speaks to our conversation, I thought of this point at some point when you asked me some of the challenges that women face in this space. And I think one of the other challenges is when young women put their hands up and say, I'm starting something, and they take it, they run with it. And the challenges are obviously, there's things to do with the politics of civil society that you may not know about when you start something new. You're just, very young and just very excited to be in the space. And then there's all these things to do with power and money and control. Obviously, the perception is if, some funders, for instance, will feel that, oh, because you're young and you need the money, they may try to foist ideas or opinions or ways of doing things onto you, because the exchange is sometimes not seen as equal. You're exchanging ideas for funding, but sometimes it depends on different funders. And this is the thing, there's now a lot more feminist funders or funders with an idea about working with young women in ways that are participatory and an exchange, rather than a top-down kind of situation where I bring you money and so you do whatever it is that I want you to do. So I think those are the challenges that one meets up with, and you've never experienced those things before. And then all of a sudden, everything is a little bit in crisis mode, because ultimately there's, you either have to shift to what your funding is demanding that you do, or stand your ground and potentially lose funding, staff, etc. So I think that going back in time, if I went back in time, if I knew all these things, and some of those things I knew from reading, but then I think when you're young and you have an idea, you always somehow think, you can change the world. And that's not to say that you can't. You change the world in some ways, but I think some of those things that you come across are things that you have not been exposed to, and they can be very catastrophic. So in a long way, I'm answering your question, Munya, by saying, of course, it is a loss to the space. It is a loss to women and to the environment of feminist movement building. But I think there's perhaps the lesson that can come out of that is how other young feminists or young women who are running their own initiatives can avoid some of those challenges or navigate them in ways that ensure sustainability. But, I'm really excited to see what Feminist Voices will continue to do. They are already doing quite a lot. And so, at least there's something there.
Thank you for that, Fungai. I think we have another question from Kafui. Please try and unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Good. Yeah, thank you, Maggie. And I'm thrilled about the aspect of the conversation that deals with culture. You will all bear with me that most of these technologies that we talk about, this Web 2.0 technologies or social media technologies, are designed from specific geographical locations and orientation. And the aspect of this conversation that deals with culture, to me, is something that is of essence that we should pay attention to. This raises an issue of the socialization of technology. How are we socialized when it comes to technology in terms of its design and its usage? More specifically, and this goes to, the three discussants, is there the need for a cultural sensitive technological design? And in this sense, I mean Web 2.0 technologies. And in this case, how do we ensure that indigenization is a part of this? I am asking this question because we all come from different cultural backgrounds. We cannot assume that all cultures are the same. But in the same strand, we would also appreciate the fact that different cultures approach different issues differently. There are many cultures where it's even a taboo, or it's considered an offense to even insult a woman publicly or to denigrate a woman publicly, and many other such examples. So in the whole schema of tech socialization, how can we make it culturally sensitive with indigenous knowledge of specific cultural locations? That's my question.
Thanks for that, Kafui. Yeah, any of the panelists can answer, I think. Just unmute yourself.
So my take on that is that absolutely there is a need for a culture sensitive technology design. The need is there, right? And so to meet this need, it's either you design your own technologies that are culture sensitive, or within the space that we are in, where we are using technologies that were designed elsewhere, I think we navigate the same way that we do the world at large, right? Where you are true to yourself, you are true to your own culture, your values, and you curate your own space in the social media world. At least that is how I navigate, whereby you know what you subscribe to, and you know what your values are, and those are the spaces that you stick in, because this social media is basically what we see in the physical world, right? Where you go where you are comfortable, first of all, and you align with the people that you share values with. Because if you don't design your own space, then you have to find culturally safe spaces in the technologies that are already there. And when it comes to socialization, the only way to protect yourself or to protect children, as most people would be worried about, is to ensure that you curate your spaces. Only enter safe spaces and try and ensure that if there is content you do not want to consume, it's in your hands to prevent that. I think that's all I can say.
Could I just add something as well? Okay, so I think also the fact that we socialize technology. So, we are using these platforms that are, a lot of them are Western. I think TikTok is one of the outliers because it's Chinese owned. But you can think about this as an example. So I think a lot of people at the end, towards the end of last year on Twitter, people in the Western space, particularly in America, were talking about leaving Twitter because of the ownership change to Elon Musk and people not having, they don't align their values or their principles with him. And so they felt like Twitter, was going to go a certain way and they didn't want to be there anymore. And some people actually left and joined another platform, which is up and coming. But you would find that outside of a Western perspective, a lot of people were not engaging with that conversation in a similar way, because for whatever they are using Twitter for, the politics behind who owns it was not that important. It's the same thing with WhatsApp and Facebook and Meta and whatever's going on out there with Mark Zuckerberg and Meta as a company. A lot of people cannot leave WhatsApp because that's where their community is. And if you have a small business and you're using WhatsApp Business, that's where you sell your stuff. That's a very different context, particularly on African context, where people are using all these platforms very differently and for different ends. So I think it's also important to always remember that the technology in itself, yes, it comes with its values and in the ways that it's created and constructed, and it's not constructed for us as African consumers. I think we're at the bottom of the rung of, people that anyone is really thinking about. But then we appropriate technology, we make it our own, we situate it within our culture. Nyadak talked about South Sudanese on Twitter, there's Kenyans on Twitter, there's all kinds of different groups that you'll find who use Twitter, and they make it their own national tool for talking about things in a certain way. And so I think if we can socialize a platform in that way, we can definitely bring in our culture that says we respect other people's opinions. We do not accept people trolling or calling people names, et cetera, because none of that would actually happen if we were having physical conversations with these trolls who feel very empowered to come online and do what they do. So I think that sometimes we take aspects of our culture online and we say, yes, this is who we are. But then when it kind of becomes something around misogyny or violence against women, we take a stand back and say, oh, well, I don't know what's going on there. Just like Tindyebwa said about activists who come on and they say, yes, we're human rights activists. But then when it's something to do with, slut shaming or publicly humiliating a woman for whatever it is, they take a step back too and they say, that's not got anything to do with politics. And yet it does. So I think that we are mirroring somehow similarly the things that we silence ourselves about in our physical dimensions or realms where, a woman's being hit in a house next door. And then, as neighbors, you say, it's none of our business. It's bad what's going on over there, but we don't do anything because, we want to keep the peace with our neighbors and we want to be able to go to them when we need something, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think that we are not necessarily socializing the technology. We are. And what we see about these trolls are some aspect of our culture, some aspect of our silence about the same issues that happen in the physical world. So whether we like it or not, the culture still shows itself in the digital.
Yeah, I think just to add on and not repeat most of what has been said, I feel like especially for South Sudan, we do have the opportunity to just learn how to have a more healthy, hygienic way of consuming digital media. For a lot of people, it is new, but also for others, I think it's just the excitement that is there about digital media and how it is able to give people voices. You can tweet from wherever, you can sit from behind your desk, wherever you are, and say what you need to say. So I feel like as a country in a space where we're still very new to technology and digital technology, we do have an opportunity to be able to, within ourselves internally, find a way to have a very healthy relationship with digital media and social media. Something also I want to touch on is the aspect of the fact that our internet is still very limited in the terms of how it operates. So I was also thinking in the aspects of content moderation. sometimes you find that when things are being discussed, how we're still finding a way of how moderation can work effectively for the country, but also in a very positive way, right? Because there still hasn't been the technology that is needed to be able to say, okay, maybe this is an actual hateful word, because for somebody it is and for someone it's not. So we also have to find a way to really create a strategy for effective content moderation, and not just have it for people who can be able to abuse it the way they like, which in a way it's very difficult, I think, for me to put, because it's still very gray in the country. And it's something that we're still looking at and finding ways to discuss and see how that can happen. Again, policy is important to make sure that is put in place, but that is still a bit far off when it comes to the country. So there's a lot of aspects that, and I do understand the discussion that a lot of these platforms are from the West, and they do come from a North they were built with that perspective in mind. But we also have to remember that we have to find ways that we can be able to still use these platforms, but in a way that is helpful for us. And I think that is one of the most important points. And within that, we also have to really push, again, policy is really important, because that can be able to cement the information and not allow just anybody and everybody to use and abuse some of these techniques that are available.
Thank you so much to all of you. Kafui, I hope that answered your question. We have one more question in the chat by Francis. He asks, in what ways can technology help address the root causes of gender inequality in Africa, such as cultural beliefs, social norms and discrimination, and how can it be integrated into development programs aimed at empowering women and girls? So I think we'll go Fungai first, then Tindyebwa, then Nyadak. Sorry, we can't hear you. Unmute. Oh, we go the other way around?
Whatever works.
Okay.
I was just saying it's a long question, so you need to, I'm digesting its different parts.
Okay, Francis asks, in what ways can technology help address the root causes of gender inequality in Africa, such as cultural beliefs, social norms, and discrimination? And how can it be integrated into development programs aimed at empowering women and girls?
Okay, thank you. I think that, you know, again, it's this shift or this two-way street, that gender inequality is something that, you know, technology can impact, but it can also pronounce, it can make it something bigger. And so there definitely needs to be more avenues for conversations around gender inequality in the physical space and in the digital space. So I think this conversation, particularly about how technology is not something that's just exists, and you know, we just get it from America and we are just using it. That's not true. And I think once we understand the social aspects of technology, the way that we are shaping it, that our culture is shaping how we are using it, I think we will have a little bit more of a clearer idea that in the process of understanding that, we're shaping how the technology is used, and we're shaping how gender inequality continues to be played out. So I would always start from that place. I think a lot of times we just think of digital tools as digital tools, but there's nothing like, it's just like a car. You know, a car is a car in itself, but then you make it your car. You know, you give it a color. Some people personalize the number plate. Some people give it a name. You know, it's not a value-free item. The car that I have is not going to be the car you have. You know, it's just the house I have is not going to be the house you have. Everything is socialized. according to our perception. So I think it's always important to start from there. And it's something that sounds very obvious, but I don't think many people are even exposed to that conversation about how we socialize technology and how it then just is playing out to us who we are or what we uphold as principles and values in our society. And then I think in terms of how it can be integrated, we need to really just start from the basics. Digital literacy is such an important thing. So many people, women and girls in particularly, do not have access to any digital devices, not a mobile phone, not even a smartphone. We're just talking basic mobile phone, just the amount of autonomy that one can have in having a mobile phone. You see it so often, women who have been market vendors and then they get access to a mobile phone and then they're able to somehow know information about where to, get stocks of things or how to sell them, or, people who are just running small businesses through things like WhatsApp Business, who would otherwise not have something to do. But then now they say to themselves, if I go and get stock of something, and if I advertise it somewhere on Facebook, and I set up a WhatsApp Business account, I can sell things. That changes someone's life. And it's not just that woman's life she's changed. She's probably changing the lives of her children or her family, or, having an impact in a different way. So I think just digital literacy, having access to the basic technologies, the infrastructure that we're all using and somewhat taking for granted, can change such a big part of a person's life, because everything is now so much more digitized. So just basic computer skills, mobile phone skills, and also social media skills. I think that's something that we just now need to integrate more and more into the school curriculum, and for civil society actors to really do outreach in ensuring that women in disadvantaged areas also have access to that information.
Thanks for that, Fungai. Tandegile?
Thank you so much. So I think that what social media gives us is a platform where stories that we would never hear about, we have access to stories that we would never hear about, right? So for example, recently in Kenya, sorry, I don't know if you can hear me, my earphones just went off. Let me just change, just a second. Okay, thank you. So I was saying that, so recently in Kenya, there was a documentary that just came out on the sex for work scandal, right? Where in the tea plantations, it has come out that for women to get jobs there, a lot of them are subjected to rape, where the managers demand sex for women to get jobs. So the fact that that documentary was aired and shared so widely on digital media platforms, it was circulated via WhatsApp, it was shared on Twitter, on Facebook, means that more people became aware of this situation. So what awareness does is that it also puts pressure on policymakers to solve these issues. Whereas traditionally, something like that would happen, it's aired on the BBC, and only people with satellite TV get to hear that. And policymakers can ignore such issues, right? And in Kenya, again, there was a video that was circulated of a victim of FGM, female genital mutilation, where this little girl ran away from a ceremony or this event where they were supposed to go through that. And then she was captured by her family, beaten up by the community, and subjected to that FGM. That was social media giving us a platform where awareness can be raised on such issues. So again, because that video was so wildly circulated, even proponents of that culture are ashamed, right? So the fact that now the world is looking at you and thinking, is this what you do, means that people are put in a situation where questions that would never have a reason, because these things are done under the guise of culture, and they're often done privately,
right? Now that these things are out in the open, it means, again, policymakers have no choice but to intervene, right? In Zimbabwe, we had a situation, again, recently in the past few days, where these boys were captured on video beating up a girl, and that is in rural Cholocho, deep in the rural areas, where traditionally previously something like that could happen and would never get to hear about it. But I'm in London at the moment and I watched that video. So that means that the digital space is actually a tool that we can use to bring attention to issues that women and girls face, to then advocate for policies to be for policies that protect women and girls, and also to galvanize for action. So instead of just people in Cholocho protesting to say, we want these boys punished, or even just ignoring it, because the culture there has been protecting perpetrators of domestic violence for so long, people who would have kept quiet before are now forced to speak out, because now you have to have a position. You have to say, what do you think about this situation where this young girl has been beaten up by a group of boys? Do you think she deserves it because she's a woman? Is that the culture you subscribe to? And sometimes when that question arises and people are forced to take a stand, they have no choice but to take the right, to take a stand that will make them seem good. So I think that this addresses the root. This addresses changing social norms and discrimination, because most of these things happen behind closed doors, right? Where we would have situations where a child is raped and in the family are told, no, you can't speak about it. We don't want the family to look bad. But now social media exposes issues that happen in families where we have children recording this domestic violence situations happening in their own homes, and it's brought to light. So in terms of how to integrate this into development programs, Fungai has already spoken about the issue of access. And so now we are realizing that instead of just giving rural communities computers, as these programs that have been happening in many African countries are doing, we also now need to advocate for service providers to make sure that there is network in rural communities. And social media gives us the platform for that advocacy. It also gives us access to decision makers. We can now go directly to internet service providers and advocate for them to provide network to rural communities. So I'm all about the functions of social media, how I have seen social media helping us to push causes that can protect women and girls. So that is the advocacy, galvanizing action, having those protests on social media, and bringing attention to issues. Thank you.
Yeah, just as Tandakile said, like very perfectly put it. I think that also has been a big major one for us, is the space to be able to hold people accountable. Yeah, things are brought to light. We're able to know, as I'm sitting in Juba, I'm able to know what is happening in Bentiu. I'm able to know what is happening in Malakal. And people can be able to talk about it, and people can be able to mobilize action. And sometimes you find that actually it has been very helpful for the people, because then now we don't have to wait for government to act. People can be able to now reach those areas. They can be able to, if there's a case, for example, they can be able to reach out to family members, community leaders, and take swift action as we wait for authorities to now come together and address the issue, which oftentimes is delayed justice. So now you find that now people being able to now actively go themselves has been able to help and support justice for women and girls. I think also just one more thing that I can add on that is the aspect of learning and unlearning, which is a big thing that we have learned over the course of digital media, because we've had some amazing individuals, but also groups, programs, organizations who have utilized digital media and even traditional media to inform people about things, right? For example, South Sudan has more than 64 tribes. We've been able to learn about each tribe and their traditions and how they carry out things. You can even go deep into things like customary law, because that's also a big part when it comes to gender-based violence. you're able to learn, this is how people operate in this area and this people operate in this area. So we have been able to gather tools, right? Outside of just the information needed, but also learning tactics, strategies on how to handle things, how to mitigate things, in order to have results that are beneficial to the cause and whatever it is that is happening at the moment or in that specific area, which now helps to the greater cause. So I think that has been a big thing when it comes to addressing gender equality, because then now each person is in the spotlight. Each person is able, even individually without waiting for someone else to teach you, you can learn for yourself, this is what I can do. If I need to report, this is the number I need to call. If I have a bigger issue, for example, what does the law say? Now people have interest to go and look for policies and laws and contact lawyers so that they're able to address issues that need to be addressed, especially those ones that are emergency and they're urgent. In terms of integration, Fungai did speak about it, and the killer as well talked about it. More than digital literacy, which again is very low in the country, which is something we need in schools. Again, access to networks and internet, that's something very important, but also having more people, especially more women leaders, come forward and present these things in their spaces. If we talk about cabinet, if we talk about parliamentary arm of government, if we can be able to have more leaders also pushing in some of these policies into the adequate places, then now we can be able to push more for these things to be accessible and available for people to be able to use and learn from.
Thank you so much, ladies. I think we're going to wrap up now. Njoki had promised that this would be a fascinating conversation, and I think it really has. So I'd like to ask you just quickly if you have any closing remarks, and then we can hand over back to Njoki. Fungai, please.
Okay. Thank you. I think for me, I'll just reiterate the social aspects of technology, that we constantly need to think about those issues. Policy is important. Getting regulators on board is important. All the things that are, the nuts and bolts of how these things are utilized are important. But I think I constantly see the social aspects of technology sort of being marginalized or put below everything else. That's not to say the other things aren't important, but it is to say that they all work together. So I'd love to see more people talking about how we socialize the internet in different contexts and how that perpetuates our own ideas about culture, about women, about gender, and all these different things, because no technology is value-free. There's nothing that we use, that we consume, that we engage with, that engages human interaction, that can be value-free. We bring our human experience to technology. We bring our social experience to technology. We bring our cultural experience to technology. And it's important to then look at the digital culture that we have created and say, how does this reflect our own culture, and where do we fix the issue? Do we fix it only through the digital space or from the physical realm? Or at the same time, do we work on both, and how do we do that? Thank you.
Thank you. Tande, go ahead.
Thank you so much. So I think in just closing, I'd like to encourage other women to realize that despite all the challenges we spoke about social media, we need to see the opportunities that digital media gives us, and the biggest of which is for women's voices to be heard. We need more women's voices to be heard about everything that is happening around us. If there are any bills that are being debated, anything that is happening, we need to hear women's voices, because unfortunately, we are the ones most affected by any decision that is made. So it is important for us, now that there is a space where we can speak out and be heard, to utilize that space. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Last but definitely not least, Nyadak, please.
I think for me, I would like to encourage, especially South Sudanese, let's rally behind the aspect of evolving technology to our benefit. Again, I often say this, we really are lucky to be in a position where we're young people in a nation that is developing, is starting. We have the power and we have the ability to set the standard for not only ourselves, but for the world as well. So how can we take these tools that are available to us and are useful to us to be able to address important things, to be able to lay foundations that this country will go on, even past us as people, and that we will be able to create a space that is not always toxic and not always scary and not always dangerous, but then also we're able to use these tools to address not only issues, but also find ways to promote development in every single way for every single person here. So I think it's a really good opportunity that we have, and we should utilize it. Quickly, Maggie, earlier you wanted to ask a question about what would I tell a younger girl or a younger person who's coming into the space? The internet is the internet. It is going to be scary. It is going to be confusing sometimes, but it's important that also you learn the tools that will keep you safe, and also we rally together to be able to ensure that we are putting in policies and regulation that will be able to support people as they continue to use the internet, because there will come a time where traditional avenues will not be available, will not be useful. And then also if you're in any kind of niche like peace building or communications or whatever it is, I would encourage you to be intentional about what you do, how you do it, how you present yourself, and also make sure that it's in the benefit as to what you want to do and what you want to portray and the message you want to send out. Because sometimes we forget, the internet doesn't forget. We could forget, but the internet doesn't forget. So also make sure that even in that limited space that you have, you're able to send out the message that you need to send that will make the impact that you need to make. So it's a very beautiful space, and I've really enjoyed learning and growing, and also using it to support our efforts here in the country across different fields. And I think it is something that we need to get more and more into. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you for taking the time, for honoring our invite to participate in this panel. The discussions have been great and so much to think about, so much to even write about now. So yeah, thank you for honoring our invite. And now I'd like to hand over to Njoki, who will help us close out the panel. Thanks.
Wow, thanks so much, Maggie. Really, what a way to commemorate International Women's Day. Really great conversations from how we need to have this space and create this space for women to matters cultural aspect, social aspect, and also just insightful and interesting insights from regarding the social media in South Sudan. So I want to take this moment to just welcome our Executive Director, Ms. Shuvai Nyoni, to just give us a vote of thanks, and then we'll be ending our discussion today. So welcome, Shuvai.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I really don't know why I needed to come on to say anything at all. I think everything has been said. I'm just really excited to have had the privilege to listen to you all. I think it was such a rich conversation that I hope will be continued in other ways and on other platforms. I know Njoki and Maggie have plans to continue the conversation in other spaces. And so please, certainly those of you who have joined us online, look out for that. Mine is really just to say thank you so much to our three panelists, to Fungai, Nyadak, and Tande. Thank you very, very much to all three of you. We've learned a great deal. And thank you, of course, to the brains. This is the brainchild of Maggie and Njoki, and I think it has gone so very well, and you've really given us the opportunity to learn a lot. I hope we can hear more from the people who joined us. Some of them we know, some we don't know. And thank you also to Adeoti for facilitating this. So from the African Leadership Center, thank you so much, Asanteni Sana, and we hope you will join us for other events happening during Africa Week this week. Thanks.